Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Starting with a cup of coffee because brew day is on, and you start with a coffee, you end with decent beer. If you start with a beer, it's like 50-50. Now, talking about decent beer, one beer that I've always wanted to make is a really nice lager. And I've tried lagering for 3 months after the very slow fermentation process. Lagers are just a pain. They take up space in your fermentation chambers. You have to ferment them cold, so they take longer to ferment. There's a lot of time involved in a lager, and if you get it even slightly wrong, you will get off flavors. And I've always had the odd off flavor in my lagers. Slightly banana-y esters, perhaps a little bit sulfury, not lagering it long enough. I've made the mistake of trying to push the lager yeast to too high a fermentation temperature. And these, like, you get the green apple, acetaldehyde, or whatever it's called, all these different flavors that aren't great. Now, the one that had the slight banana flavor, actually I drank all of it because I didn't mind it, but it's not what I was trying to make. So I've been searching around. I've looked at pressurized fermentation, which Dr. Hans has got like quite a few videos on that. He's not the only one. Most of the OGs around YouTube have got a video on pressurized fermentation at least. Now, when I moved into this bar, I had to get rid of the big fridge, which held my stainless steel fermenter, which is the only one that really can hold pressure. And I've put a chest freezer under the bar here, and this whole bar lifts up. So it doesn't fit into the chest freezer, which means I'm back to using the old, the plastic wide mouth fermenters. So research continued, and then I've started to look into the this new kveik strain that's come out, which is called Lutra kveik, I believe. Yeah, so this is Lutra kveik yeast slurry in there. So it's not packaged like a smack pack. The smack pack where you've got to burst, it's just yeast in here. And all you do is you let it warm up to room temperature, give it a shake to get all the yeast into suspension, and then chuck it in. And this here says temperature range for fermentation is 20 to 35 degrees, and here Lutra is shockingly clean with unrivaled speed when pitched at 32C. So guess where we're going to pitch this? I'm thinking 31 because I've actually got too much leeway on the Inkbird. So 31 will be anything from 29.5 to 32.5. And that'll be, that's in the range they're telling us to go for. So I bought a little malt miller because I had to buy this yeast. It's like $8-9, something like that. I'm obviously going to try and use that for a few batches, but I bought 25 kilos of Pilsner malt and a kilo of Vienna malt, and basically this yeast, and so I'm going to start with Nugget. Nugget is a bittering hop, SARS as the flavor hop in the last sort of 10 minutes of the boil, and that's it. So it's not going to be the most hoppy, but I'm aiming for about 30 IBUs. Sort of towards the top end, towards the middle of a Czech premium lager. So they're slightly more bitter. I wanted to ferment out dry. What I've put in here is for a 5-gallon batch. It's 5 kilos of Pilsner malt, and that's it. I put a little bit of acid in to bring the pH down, but apart from that, that's all I've got. So you guys have seen my brewing process. What we did is I left it mashing. We went and watched the movie. I'm probably not going to show you all of the whole brewing process. Maybe a little clip here and there. And then what I want to do is come back once it's ready, when I would have thought you're probably looking at about 2 weeks to allow it to ferment, cold crash, keg, and then carbonate. Nice and slow, no rushing. So, because you can do a kveik yeast, you can have a beer on tap within 4 or 5 days. But I'd rather take 2 weeks to drink a lager, which I've never been able to do, and which is considerably less than what it would take, because you're normally talking about at least a month. Usually the last glass out of the keg is when the lager is just about coming into its own. So I just want to delay the lag time, because I've got these kegs on tap. I've got 3 kegs on tap, and they're all going to be really quite low, and they're all going to kick at the same time. I can feel it happening, so I'm thinking get the lager in first. Second batch I'll make, I'll take half this yeast slurry, and not this yeast slurry, but the yeast cake that's produced from this yeast. I'll take half of that out and store it in a mason jar, and pitch my second batch directly on top, and that's going to be a Vienna lager. And I might change that up a little bit, in that it'll be a slightly darker, slightly more biscuity, and perhaps slightly different hops as well. But having 25 kilos of the grain, that allows me for 5 batches with a little bit of tinkering on each batch. So I'm hoping I can get it right by the end of that. Also, I want to use the Lutra I'm making a clone of Elvis juice. It's the one from the malt miller. I think it's called like grapefruit IPA or something like that. So I don't know. Perhaps it's because it's not made and packaged by Brew, you aren't allowed to call it an Elvis juice clone, or else they'll sue you or whatever. But I'm going to give that a go with the same yeast. And if I can make a lager, a pseudo lager, I think they call it, and an ale with the same yeast in a short amount of time, then I'm going to start keeping every generation, keep a little bit back. I've got these little vials, basically. They're just sample vials. So what I'll do is I'll start keeping a vial full of really good yeast, so all the nice white powdery bit, and I'm just going to keep that really cold. I'm not going to make a slant. I'm not going to put in too much effort, because it is kveik, and kveik is a hardy yeast. So what I should do is end up with a Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3, and if I find something changes in one of those generations, I might then go back to that generation and then make a starter, put half of it back in here, and use the starter. So a lot of waffling. Basically, I want to make a lager. I don't want to wait a long time. This has been touted as the answer. It's not cheap yeast, but it's kveik. It's a strain that is known for doing pseudo lagers well. So, I mean, maybe even I can't cock that up. So let's see. We'll see at the end of this video, and hopefully I haven't. So come along for the ride. Oh, I must mention as well, I got the new version of Beersmith. Definitely like the dark mode on it. It's all my stuff in the office is all dark mode, if you can, or whatever you call it. I have also, there's another hint here. This yeast likes well aerated wort, and also likes a lot of yeast nutrients. So I've got 20 grams of nugget, yeah, and that is at starter boil, and then I've got 25 grams of SARS, half a Whirlfloc tablet, and 3 tablespoons of yeast nutrient ready to go in at 10 minutes. And that's pretty much it. So at the moment I'm circulating to warm up the mash. The mash dropped down to about 55 degrees while I was out, because I just let it all turn off. It did a full hour at the right temperature. And then bringing it up to 75, keep it flowing. Going to bring the malt basket out and sparge to 25 litres, boil it down to 22, cool it down, get it in the fermenter. Okay, so I've got it down to 33 degrees. I'm going to deliver it straight out the tap. What I've done lately is I've stopped using the pump, so I can chuck the leaf hops, the hops in loose, pellet or leaf, and then I just drain straight out of here once I've let it settle. works a treat, and I'm going to deliver it from a height so I get some nice, I can oxygenate the wort on its way in. I've added the yeast nutrient to the 10-minute drop, so the food's all there. I just got to chuck the yeast in after that. Okay, so I pitched it, was at 1060, so I had a slightly lower volume. I ended up with, I think it's about 20 litres instead of 23, and 1060 original gravity, which means it's going to be pushing towards the 6%. I just want to check the temperature this morning, and I want to make sure she's bubbling. So let's have a quick look. Okay, let's open her up. Everything's looking hunky-dory here, so I'll show you what I've got set up here. So I've got the chest freezer connected to the Inkbird, currently measuring 30.5, set to 31, and bubbles happen. So far so good. Hopefully we can just let that carry on for another week. It should be fully fermented in a week. I might even then leave it for another week, even cold crash it for a week, and then get it kegged. So hopefully it'll tie in with one of my other kegs cooking. And if it works out, well, regardless of whether it works out or not, when I keg that, I'll brew another batch. Okay, so this is the climax of my lager with the Lutra kveik yeast. Now, unfortunately, I have a CO2 leak at the moment, so I'm struggling to keep it under pressure, which means I'm not going to get very much of a head on the beer. It is carbonated, but it's not quite what you would expect from a lager, let's say. So that's what we're looking at. She's not quite cleared up yet. Now I have to admit, the first one that I made came in at 7%, just over 7%. I only got 18 litres out, just trying to wing it with the volumes. So this is the second version, because I really enjoyed the first version. Even though it was 7%, it didn't last long. So I made it again, but this is a 5% lager with Lutra kveik, and it's bittered with nugget and flavoured with SARS. Now, it's delicious. It's quite dry, but it's not as crisp as your sort of macro lagers. But I actually like this. There's a sort of smoothness to it that you get, and the good thing with the Lutra kveik yeast is that you can pretty much use it for anything. So I've made a best bitter on there as well using the Lutra, and it's actually bloody nice. So my suggestion now to myself is that I just make this my house yeast, unless I'm making something that requires like a super hazy yeast or something. Now, I mean, like, that's nowhere near dropped clear. It's actually getting there, but it's the flavour of this is very reminiscent of a lager, and especially the lagers I used to drink back in SA, which are, SARS was a very popular hops. We had lagers like Hansa Pilsner, which is pretty much the same kind of grain bill, just Pilsner malt and SARS. So it's reminiscent of that, but there's a bit more to it. There's just a little bit more character that I suppose you only get it when you go to sort of a smaller brewery that isn't trying to optimize every cent spent. So yeah, in short, Lutra for the win. I did the first batch I was drinking after 5 days, this batch, it's been in the keg probably 2 or so weeks now because I've just been struggling with the CO2. I've got a leak somewhere. I think it's in the regulator. I just need to spend some time troubleshooting where that is, but I don't want to drag this video on for too long. But if you want a lager within a week that's perfectly drinkable, Lutra kveik is your answer. And also, I just pitched the second one onto, so I harvested half the yeast cake, which I've kept aside as Gen 1, smashed this straight on top of the yeast cake from the previous beer, the 7%er, and it was fermented out within 36 hours. It's good healthy yeast, ready to go, you know. And same again for the Gen 3 of the yeast. So I harvested some yeast after the Pilsner, and after the lager, and I did the same thing for the best bitter, and that was more like 24, 26 hours. That was done. I mean, overnight, I came in the next morning, the Krausen had gone, but it had risen high, but it was gone. So you can get beer that tastes good. You don't have to lager it. It still tastes like a lager. I'm going to start messing around with a little bit of Vienna malt now in this as well, just to add some complexity to it, because we're moving out of summer and into autumn/winter in the UK. So time to get a little bit more body and a little bit more malt complexity into the drinks, so you can sit and sup them a little bit longer. That is pretty much all I have for today. Look out for a video coming soon, which will be my Brew tabletop resin pour videos. I'm pretty much ready to do that now. So in the next sort of 2 or 4 weeks, in the next month, that should land, and hopefully you enjoy it. Cheers guys, thanks for sticking with me. Catch you in the next one.